I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation.
Charles, I think, will be a very good transitional monarch, and I'm not of the sort of the party that says William should take over, not Charles, because I think you need that sort of bridge between the two eras. Charles is a very accomplished statesman at this point. His particular passions for the environment, organic farming, his cares about climate change happen to gel very well, finally, with the rest of the world and the British people. And he's married Camilla, who, was a pariah for so long. But now the Queen, at the beginning of the Jubilee sort of run-up, has announced that Camilla will be Queen, known as Queen Consort, with her blessing, which was great. It took that controversy off the table. So I think he's going to have a decent run, as long as he doesn't live to 102.
So many questions, so little time. That was Tina Brown talking last year at the Washington Post Live. Couldn't be more excited to be here with the author of the Palace Papers, who knows everything about this Saturday's coronation. So Tina, my first question to you is Meghan Markle going?
She is not. And for all the kind of will she, won't she conversations that led up to that decision, I actually don't think she was ever going to come, actually. I think that she had the perfect out, which is that day is the 4th birthday of Archie, her child, their child. And, it's a perfect thing. Harry can go to the coronation and she can stay and celebrate her son's 4th birthday. And I think that was elegant and useful to everyone concerned.
The coronation wasn't planned on purpose on Archie's birthday, was it?
Certainly not. I mean, getting that date has been one of the great big juggles in the calendar. But let's put it this way, it was fortuitous for all concerned.
Okay, so let's talk about Harry and Meghan to kick this discussion off, because he is still a prince. He will be going back. There is that moment, I think, in Spare where he talks about his father saying to him, "Please, boys, don't ruin my last few years." And yet with the publication of Spare, he's thrown so many spanners into the machinery of the royal family. It's hard to see how it can function. How will he be received when he goes back, by his family and then by the public?
Well, it has been an agonizing thing, the question of Harry at the coronation, because Charles, adores Harry. He was his darling boy. He was always his favorite son, is the truth, and much closer to Harry than he was with William. So this has all been extremely painful for him. And Spare, really, he found a shattering experience. But at the same time, he wanted him there. And actually, I think that Harry has some regrets, really, about the amount of pain all this has caused. There was a moment during the preparation for Spare, shortly after the Queen's Jubilee, when he really tried to not write that book. He didn't want to go ahead with it. He wanted to stop. But it was too much money, too much commitment, too much kind of publishing, bottom line, massive amounts of money had been thrown at it at this point, so that he would have had to pay back not just the advance, but, dividends on that advance. So he went forward with it. And the book actually got kind of a lot of massive editing before it really came out. So I think that for Harry not to have been there would have been a kind of final wounding severance, and he needed to be there. Also, frankly, Harry needs the royal branding himself, because as the celebrity karma fades, as it always does after a major explosion, he needs to keep up that whole royal connection. So it was actually good for the Harry brand. How will he be received? Well, actually, the public in England, although he's massively unpopular now compared to what he used to be, I still think he'll get a cheer. He was not booed at the Queen's when he went last time. And I think, that the public will just not be thrilled, but I don't think he's going to be booed, in my view. He'll be booed by some, but I don't think it's going to be, one of those great repudiations that some people think.
So how do you think he will navigate William? Will he and William be standing next to each other? I mean, he accuses William of so many things in Spares, not least the two of them having a physical fight over Meghan. How are they going to navigate that?
Well, their relationship is actually at rock bottom. It is just, I mean, the two of them, there's no communication whatever between them. It's actually been exacerbated again, even recently, because Harry has recently revealed, in legal proceedings that are going on with the old phone hacking suit that he launched against the tabloids, it came out just recently that William had actually made a settlement with the tabloids and was paid a large amount of money. And there had been probably a secret agreement between the palace and the Murdoch papers that, once again excluded Harry. So that coming out did not please William. That was supposed to be confidential. So there's even more rancor between the two of them than there ever has been. So I think they'll sit a pretty long way from each other. But, in a decorous fashion, Harry will probably be seated, I think, with Prince Andrew's two girls, Beatrice and Eugenie, who he's very good friends with, but he won't be seated up front, with the big royals.
So you've got Prince Charles, or King Charles, I should say, sorry. You've got his son on the one hand, and then you've got his brother, Prince Andrew, who of course got into all sorts of trouble, not least with this BBC interview, but of course with his association with Jeffrey Epstein. What are they going to do with Prince Andrew?
The big problem with Prince Andrew is how do you stash away, a perfectly healthy sort of 62-year-old man? No one, I mean, the only person who wants to talk to Prince Andrew at the moment is his horse, which is why he goes riding all the time. So, I mean, and Charles has just recently told him he has to leave the house on the Windsor estate and move into Frogmore, the former abode of Meghan and Harry. It's been an endless kind of real estate, roundabout going on recently with, people being ejected and stuffed into various parts of the Windsor estate. And Andrew's very much fighting this. This was his house. The house belonged to the Queen Mother, and she sort of bequeathed it to Andrew. And Andrew believes it's his house now, and he wants to stay there for the rest of his life. But Charles has said, no, you've got to go. You've got to downsize, and you've got to go and move into Frogmore. So things are pretty tricky with Andrew at the moment. He still dies to come back, thinks he can still come back, pines to come back, but he just hasn't got the memo that nobody wants to see him. And frankly, I think he should have gone off to sort of the border countries and, I don't know, the border countries of Scotland. In days past, he would have probably been sort of banished into some castle and, but you can't do that anymore. So Andrew remains a big problem for Charles.
So, of course, one of the people who must be watching this coronation with great fascination is, of course, Kate Middleton's mother. What is Kate's role during the coronation? And if you were watching her mother, what would you think she'd be thinking?
Well, I mean, I think this is going to be Kate's, she'll be flawlessly elegant. She'll be untouchably gorgeous. She will play the perfect role of supporter, as she always does. But I'm sure that Mrs. Middleton, who I think of as the sort of the Mrs. Bennet of the Middleton family, will be sitting there thinking one step closer, one step closer, one step closer, because the next coronation will be of William and her daughter, Queen Kate. So I think she'll be thinking to herself, one step closer, as I say. I think actually one of the things I'm going to be thinking about is little George, right? Because he'll be sitting there, aged 8 or 9 or whatever he is now. And one wonders, will he be thinking, this is going to be me? Is it a frightening thought for that child to think that this will be him, after his dad? And it's a very daunting thought, I would have thought, for today's young, modern child to even contemplate such an idea that this is going to be your destiny.
Well, probably just as alarming too for William, right, who will take the throne after Charles dies.
Yes, I think that William, who's going to be the only person to kneel before his father and kiss him upon his cheek, yeah, I think William has a lot of misgivings himself, quite honestly. We don't hear about those because we've heard so vociferously about Harry's misgivings. But what Harry never really embraced in his book at all was just how hard it is for William, right? I mean, he kind of behaves in the book as if everything was great for William. I don't think everything is at all great for William. I mean, he's in this cage for the rest of his life. And, this again brings him one step closer and not too far away because Charles is, 74. We don't know how long his reign is going to be. His mother, of course, reigned till she was 96. And there is a lot of thoughts that perhaps that wasn't such a great thing in the end. So for William, I think it'll be a very sobering day, really, as he looks at his destiny.
So King Charles has got to navigate his son and his brother, his other son, William. But of course, he'll have Camilla by his side. Now, is it right that we're going to be calling her or referring to her after Saturday as Queen Camilla?
We're actually already calling her Queen Camilla. The Queen Consort bit has been swiftly dropped, and it was made known that from now on she's Queen Camilla. So she is going to be anointed as well, and she's going to be crowned with the crown of Queen Mary, who is was the great grandmother of Charles, who was married to George V. She will be crowned with that crown, with some additional diamonds in the crown, which belong to Queen Elizabeth's crown. So I think there's going to be a slight, shall we say, I think that at the moment when Camilla's crowned, there will be a sort of collective intake of breath a little bit. Because I think that what we're seeing in the polls is the British people actually are really fine with Camilla being Charles's wife, really fine with Camilla being queen. But when you go and say, should she be crowned, it dives. People don't really want to see her crowned. There's something about that moment. It seems, is it a bridge too far? But, on the other hand, the other argument is, well, look, she's his wife. She should have it. I mean, what does that say about second wives if they don't get equal status? Personally, I think all second wives should be called queen. But so there is that argument.
So what will Charles and Camilla, as far as you know, and this is probably a ridiculous question, but what will they actually be thinking, do you think, when they get up on Saturday? I mean, obviously there's been a huge amount of rehearsal for it. Do you think that they are anxious? Will they be nervous? Will they have a little shot of something before they go out on the road in the extraordinary coach that they'll ride to Westminster Abbey in? And I'm thinking of the moment when the Archbishop of Canterbury will announce King Charles in Westminster Abbey, and then the congregation all shout, "Long live the King." I mean, you've come across Charles. Do you think he's going to be excited by this? Is he embarrassed by it? What will he be thinking?
Well, I really do think that for Charles, this is the sort of greatest moment of his life, the culmination of everything. It's what he's been put on this earth to do, what he's been waiting all this time for, preparing all this time. And I think he takes it actually as a very sort of sacred moment in his life. He's quite religious. He's a deeply spiritual man at any rate, and certainly views this as a very spiritual for him occasion. The anointing, again, is going to be out of sight as it was for his mother. And that, I think, for Charles is going to be a very sacred moment. So I think that he is going to be
Can you just tell us about the anointing? Just because we haven't had a coronation for 70 years. What actually is the anointing?
The anointing is when the Archbishop, takes the sacred oils, the holy anointing oils, and daubs the king, on his head, on his chest. The king is wearing at that moment not his sort of regal robes, but his sort of, it's like a shift that they put on. I mean, it's out of sight. It's called the super tunica, which I have to say sounds like some wonderful Karl Lagerfeld thing that we all want, right? Rush out and get your super tunica, everybody. A little Monty Python-y, perhaps. But he will then emerge from...
So I just want to get this... Hold on, I just want to get this absolutely straight. He goes behind some sort of curtain or into some sort of private room.
Yes, a canopy. He'll be on a canopy, obscured from the cameras.
He'll be under a canopy. Okay, then he gets undressed. He's daubed in sacred oil, and then he's redressed.
Then he's put into the ceremony, the royal, the estate robes, which are the robes of the king, the beautiful purple ermine robes. of the king, and then he comes out and he's at that moment he's king. And so that's a very, very big deal for Charles. So I think that he's going to be very focused, very centered, and very calm. I think Camilla is going to be, quite honestly, a basket case. I think she is this is such a wild development that she's going to be now queen, really. And even though she has been preparing for it now for the last, certainly actually for the last year, but 10 months or whatever it is since the Queen died, and she knew, of course, this would happen now that has been married to the Prince of Wales. But the full velocity of this massive, responsibility and huge worldwide event. This is not someone who was raised for that. Don't forget, Charles has been on the public stage forever, ever since he literally it was in his stroller. He's been on the public stage. He's been making speeches. He's been all over the world. He's the world's most accomplished statesman. Camilla, was a country wife living in the Shires, married to an army officer who was, of course, was the mistress of Charles, but, she was the out of sight girlfriend. She never really ever expected to be in this position in her life. And I think it's been very, very sort of nerve-wracking for her in every conceivable way.
But if you're at Harvard Business School, she would make the most extraordinary study in how she went from being possibly the most loathed woman in Britain, because one has to remember that, of course, Princess Diana was still alive at this stage. So the juxtaposition between poor Diana, who the public felt very sympathetic to for having been the recipient of Charles's adultery, if you like, to suddenly ascending the throne. That is an extraordinary journey in terms of public relations.
It's an unbelievable turnabout. And I mean, she had the most incredible strategic patience. There's no doubt about it. It has been a very, very careful sort of re-emergence for her. And, she's had all these setbacks too, which people forget. I mean, yes, she was sort of the other woman all the way through the Diana case, and in fact, people always the tabloids were just terrible about her. They called her an old trout, an old bag, a sort of they used every conceivable. There was even a dish at a restaurant which was called smoked haddock Parker bowls. With people just ridiculed her all the time,
right.
to such an extent that she actually used to sign her love letters to Charles, "Your devoted old bag, Camilla," as a sort of joke, because that's how she was always regarded. So she had all that. Then she gets to her 50th birthday. They're divorced, Charles and Diana, finally, and the goal is to bring her out because they're divorced. There's a blazing 50th birthday party, which is the moment that Charles hosts the party for her, and it's the kind of moment of Camilla's coming out. And what happens? A few months later, Diana dies. At which point, Camilla, once again, is cast back into the role of, the evil temptress, cast back into the shadows. She literally has to go into hiding for really a year or two, because, the kind of sanctification of Diana was at such a massive point, that she was the most adored woman in the world. It went on, and she literally went back into hiding. But then, gradually, she comes out again, out of hiding. And Charles, of course, has a great press secretary in Mark Bolland, whose role was Operation PB, as they called it, Operation Parker Bowles, get Camilla back into the sort of, get her out of the shadows, move her gradually into a place where Charles could marry her. And, his main opposition was the Queen. The Queen did not want that to happen. I mean, the Queen was so against Camilla, she wouldn't even allow Camilla to come to Charles's 50th birthday party. She had to be kind of sitting at home, like, washing her hair, while her entire social group of friends and posh friends and landowners and all the rest of it were all dancing the night away at Windsor Castle. That was a bitter thing. So we've gone from that to her now being Queen Camilla, then being anointed. So it is extraordinary what she's pulled off.
And so she gets anointed too, and, as you said, crowned too.
Yeah, she gets crowned with Queen Mary's crown. And, I think that's going to be a very big moment. And she's going to be attended by her grandchildren. Her entire family are there. And what is kind of piquant as well is that Camilla never has stopped being very close to her ex-husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, and he will be in the Abbey too. Smiling with pride like the Queen Mother.
Not something people always feel about their ex.
No.
So let's think that this must be the most extraordinary guest list to put together. And who hasn't made the cut? Or I suppose perhaps I should ask that the other way around. Let me ask it the other way around. Who's made the cut? What was the criteria for people being invited? Yeah. And then who hasn't made the cut? Much more interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the guest list, as we know, it's been greatly slimmed down, from Queen Elizabeth's day. I mean, there were 6,000 people who came to 6,000 in the congregation for Queen Elizabeth, and they had to kind of build scaffolding all over the Abbey to keep them in. So it was reduced to 2,000, which is really not that many when you consider the kind of people that have to be invited. There was also a desire, really particularly sort of promoted by Charles, that this was going to be a much more inclusive coronation. So, of course, you're going to see many, many more people of colour in this crowd, I mean, than you ever would have found at the first coronation of before. So the idea was to make it much more inclusive, so that, they were the peers of the realm who normally would have been invited, all of them, the entire sort of every major, noble name appeared at the last coronation dressed in their sort of noble robes. They've all been kind of bums rushed out of the situation, except for just a handful, much to their absolute chagrin, and have been replaced by people from, the National Health Service and the charities, and Charles's, all of his multi charities that he hosts. So there's going to be there'll be a big component which are those kind of people. The MPs also used to all be invited. Now they've been cut down to 40, which is the worst about that is that they've been told they can't bring their wives, and there was an enormous amount of gnashing of teeth about that and complaining. So it's been greatly reduced, and every so often the Daily Mail has had enormous fun sort of running a piece every 3 days with some sort of crusty duke in the country sort of saying through clenched teeth that he has absolutely no concerns about the fact that he wasn't invited. So there's a lot of people who many noses are out of joint all over the place. I mean, interestingly, Fergie, once again, has not made the cut. Why do I think that's interesting? She never makes the cut, but sometimes she has been lately, and her 2 daughters are going, and Andrew's going. So she might have thought this time she could have sneaked in, but she said very gamely that she'll be staying at home instead, stringing up bunting and and eating a coronation chicken sandwich. And then various friends, various friends who kind of were asked very, very late. People like, for instance, Stephen Fry, who's one of Charles's very, very good friends. I mean, he only just recently got his invitation, but a few of them are beginning to dribble out now, but it's been very parsimonious.
I was going to ask if we expect a celebrity contingent. I mean, will the Beckhams be there? Is Oprah going? Does this have the same appeal as a royal wedding?
No, they will not be there. That is not Charles's gang anyway. And there's no desire to kind of dress the set with celebrities who just happen to be, the people we all want to see. Absolutely no, that won't be the case. There'll be a lot of crowned heads from who nobody will recognise from Europe. A lot of them. And
right.
Some prime ministers. I mean, Macron is going. President of Poland's going. Biden, as we know, is not going. But then again, American presidents, I don't think, have ever been to the coronation. I know that Eisenhower didn't go to Elizabeth. So Jill Biden is going to be going and taking her granddaughter, which has caused a certain amount of, shall we say, nobody expected her to show up with a +1. So that was another little moment of palace frisson.
Well, surely they couldn't expect the First Lady to sit on her own. I mean, one's mindful of the fact that poor Biden the president had to sit 16 rows back at the Queen's funeral, behind all the European royals.
Oh, I'm telling you, this is a ruthless cut. People are not getting any +1s.
No. So is the food? I mean, obviously not within Westminster Abbey itself, but are there sort of side parties? Is it like the White House Correspondents' dinner? I mean,
well, there's a lot of village parties going on. The chic thing to do is to go to your country house in the village, and take part in the big village festivity, whatever that is. The decreed coronation dish is coronation quiche, which has also got very bad reviews, with people saying it's a terrible sort of soggy idea to have a coronation quiche. So there's massive amounts of coronation quiches being baked. Bunting will be strung. We're reading already all the pieces saying that nobody's enthusiastic, but that will not be true on the day. That is what they always say before any of these royal events. And then just in about 24 hours before, everybody goes completely bonkers and becomes a patriot and a monarchist and starts jiggling around with the Morris dancing. And I think it's going to be a big fiesta, actually.
So what grade would you give King Charles in this period, the sort of internship he's had? I mean, admittedly, he's had an internship for the entire of his life, but in the sort of 6 months since his mother died to now, I mean, there were a couple of awkward moments at the beginning of his monarchy, with the pen incident where he gets very flustered over a pen that's leaking.
I just hate these stinking things. I hate these stinking things.
That was such a bad. That was not good, because you got a slight insight there into the fact that he probably loses his temper quite a lot, and Camilla looked sort of resigned to it. But you know, what kind of a king is he going to be, and has he been doing okay so far?
Honestly, apart from his the pen flap, which of course got more TikTok views than the entire Queen's death altogether, I think, he's actually been flawless. I mean, he's really been flawless, because essentially, you know, the publication of Spare was his first massive issue, you know, and he sailed through it absolutely brilliantly. Basically, everybody, they all just rallied around the royals, and out they went, sailing forth, you know, being immaculate and going to their charities, and they just simply said nothing, and that got him a lot of points, I have to say. So, you know, in a way, sort of inadvertently, I think Harry enabled Charles to gave him some points, actually, which I know was not the intention. He's also just been so kind of debonair and so appropriate at every moment. I mean, it started with the moment the Queen died, when he came out and made a marvelous speech that had, you know, humanity, humility, warmth, but dignity, and he really saw the preparation there. I mean, it was a wonderful display of kingly conduct. And then everything that he's done since has been incredible, really. I mean, you know, he wanted to go to the COP meeting last year, the climate change, UN climate change meeting, and he was told by the then, now you see her, now you don't, Prime Minister Liz Truss, that he shouldn't go, and he accepted that. But then, you know, he hosted everybody for COP, and in a way, his convening was a much more interesting thing to be at than COP itself. So he's already shown, you know, that he's a great convener, as he's going to be. And I mean, when he went off to, of course, his French tour was cancelled by the riots, or the protests, I should say, in France. But he went to Germany.
I think we might have lost our connection.
Oh, okay. What happened?
The author of the Palace Papers back. We've definitely lost our connection for the time being, but hopefully we'll get it back soon. We're just talking about the coronation and any questions that you may have. Tina, you're back. You're back. Tina.
I'm back.
We just lost you for 10 seconds there. Good, that's a relief.
Where did I
talking about? Yeah, you were just you lost us. You were talking about how King Charles actually has been flawless so far, and that he's a great convener, and that his convening, actually, I think it was the weekend before COP, possibly, was actually more interesting than COP itself.
Well, that's correct. And then, of course, he went to Germany. Couldn't go to France because of the protests in France, as he'd planned, which was disappointing. But he went to Germany, and it was considered a huge success, because this was supposed to be a lot of the post-Brexit, you know, healing of using Charles essentially to start healing the wounds of Brexit, essentially. And he got hugely good marks for that trip, because, you know, again, you know, Charles is a statesman. He knows all these prime ministers. He speaks German. He speaks French. He you know, he's been meeting these world leaders ever since he was, you know, 20. So he's just very, very good at it. So he's now really the country's most seasoned diplomat, actually. And at a point when there's a huge amount of volatility, it's actually a very big asset to have Charles out there as far as the Foreign Office is concerned.
So nevertheless, there are several polls pointing to the fact that younger people in particular aren't very interested in the coronation at all. And I take your point that the day before, people suddenly get interested, and certainly there was an enormous outswelling of sympathy and adoration for the Queen at her funeral. But Britain's in a weird place. You alluded to the did you see her now she's gone, Liz Truss Prime Minister? There's been 3 prime ministers in 6 months. There's endless strikes in Britain across various industries, doctors and nurses striking. Does this feel something that Britain needs right now, or does it feel out of keeping with the times?
Well, to be honest, I mean, one of the few things that seems to be working properly is actually the monarchy and the transition to between the reigns. I mean, that's what people are kind of surprised about, I think. I certainly predicted that when the Queen died, you'd have this extraordinarily destabilized moment, as regards to the monarchy. But actually, because Charles has been so sure-footed, that doesn't seem to have happened. And all of the kind of volatility and chaos has all been directed in the political class. So that, in fact, it reminds people that to have a head of state who is not partisan, who is not from one side or the other, who actually can unite people without politics being involved, has in fact proved, I think, very, very useful at this particular moment in national life. It's certainly true that the younger generation are less and less interested in monarchy. But they're not hostile to it particularly. I mean, the polls don't show that there's a great. The irony is that a lot of people are bored by Charles or don't think Camilla should be queen. But the fact is that the monarchy itself is in very good standing with the British people. So perhaps it doesn't really matter, frankly, that the younger generation are not that engaged. Maybe they really weren't anyway, ever, before Diana, because Diana was the rock star who sort of brought the young into the monarchy, essentially, who made everybody excited and engaged with what was happening with the monarchy. I don't think that young people were probably at all interested in the boring old trout-faced, Queen Mary or the George VI and the Queen were, it was the war, so everybody was very patriotic. But I don't think that young people were hanging on, the words of them particularly. So it may well just be that actually young people are not that interested in monarchy and never have been, unless it happens to be someone as exciting as Princess Diana.
So is Diana's ghost going to be hanging over the coronation? She famously said in her interview with Martin Bashir that she didn't believe Charles would ever get what she called the top job, but here he is already in the top job. What will her friends will any of her friends and family be there? Will her brother, who spoke so eloquently at her memorial, be there? Charles Spencer.
No, Charles Spencer's not going, and he made some slightly derogatory comment about no, he wouldn't be there, but he thinks he's got some coronation coronet knocking about in an attic or something. So no, he won't be there. So I think it's a lot of poignance about it. I mean, I think, one can't underestimate. I'm sure that William will be thinking about it, about his mother. I think it's worth thinking about the kind of amazing excitement it would be if Diana was being crowned on May the 10th, or May the 6th. If that incredibly beautiful and charismatic woman was about to have a crown put on her head, the magic is something you could hardly imagine what it would be. So I think there is a sort of poignance about, ruefulness about the fact that she, who died at 36, never got this moment, which she would have been so good at. Let's face it, she would have been really, really, really good at this. And it's very sad, actually, that it didn't happen. But we have the prospect of King William and Queen Kate. And that, I think, is going to be another very exciting moment for the monarchy. So they have that to look forward to. And at that point, probably young people will become much more engaged when Queen Catherine is on the throne.
Well, and of course, for all the trials and tribulations with Harry and Meghan and William and Kate, they've kept it relevant. they've managed to create a new soap opera which has spun out across TikTok and Instagram and all social media. So in a sense, even though it's not William and Kate's turn yet, you feel that they've kept it going in a way that might not have been possible had it not been for Meghan creating the drama around the young four. Is that fair?
Well, absolutely, and I do feel, and I think Charles feels it actually. William doesn't, but Charles feels, I think, what a great loss Harry and Meghan are. Now that the balcony lineup has been so slimmed down at Charles's behest. I mean, he said, I want to make a slimmed down lineup. I want to get rid of all of the sort of, as it were, extended family on that balcony. It's just going to be the immediate family. To me, there is a Harry-shaped hole on that balcony every time, and a Meghan-shaped hole every time, when you see them. And I think it was a big loss because I think the monarchy actually did need those two, because for the Commonwealth, for the diversity, for Harry's star power, which is frankly undeniable, whatever one thinks about, his, like him or not, he has tremendous magnetism. And, it was noticeable, I thought, during the Queen's funeral that whenever the cameras were on Harry, you felt that here, the magnetism of Harry. He's a very, very charismatic individual. And of course, so is Meghan. So they're a loss, actually, to the monarchy. And the question, of course, the big question is if they're ever going to be able to be sort of somehow reunited.
Well, it does feel like if there was a moment with King Charles and Harry that people saw in public, it might be a very heartwarming moment for a lot of families across the country, because it's such a relatable event in a sense. Parents falling out with kids going off with spouses that don't fit with the bigger family. I mean, Meghan is supposed to have written a letter to King Charles, pointing out the various flaws in the royal family's attitude to her. Do you think that? Is King Charles likely to come to America and do a sort of state visit? Is it possible they might meet here?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's unfortunately, every time that it looks like things could get better, then something happens and they get bad again. I definitely think that Charles and Harry are on speaking terms, and there is going to be affection that can be built on there. It's hard to see how that can happen with William, because William is very bitter, very, very angry. And I think at the moment it's feeling he's just done with the whole situation. And the tragedy of it is really this, you saw at the Queen's funeral when they did come out together, the two couples, which was an entirely sort of stage managed event. And we know that, Kate has since said it was the hardest thing she's ever made herself do. The public loved it so much. I mean, they loved seeing those brothers together. They loved seeing those four people out there for them. And that is a great loss. So we'll see what happens. I'm not terribly hopeful. I mean, in the case of George VI, of course, and his Edward VIII, who abdicated and became the Duke of Windsor and left, and there are many parallels, obviously, with Harry and Meghan, their relationship never improved. I mean, George VI and Edward were so close as young men, very much in the same vein that William and Harry were. But as, the bitterness, again, about money, about status, about the way Wallace was received, it was so parallel, so much of it. And all that happened was that the gap between them got bigger and bigger, and the animosity got worse and worse. So I'm not sure, not very hopeful, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting. What about the empire? I mean, Canada, Australia. I mean, when the Queen died, we heard that it was possible these countries might choose to end their relationship with the Commonwealth, and certainly with the titular sort of oversight that the royal family has. Is that seems to have faded a bit, that chat now?
Well, I mean, Charles, I'm told, is totally relaxed about the fact that he understands that the 14 sovereign realms of the Commonwealth, of which he is still the titular head, that will change, that will go. It's only really a matter of time. But as to kind of it happening in a precipitous and let's boot him out now way, I don't think it is going to happen, because quickly, it'll happen eventually, probably by the time William takes over. But right now, these Commonwealth countries are not wanting to particularly expend political capital or time on referendums for their constitution unless there was a big movement inside their countries. I mean, we saw that in Barbados there was a desire, for that, and it happened. And any country, I mean, he's made it clear, Charles, I think, that, any country that wants him not to be there, he won't be there. So it's actually become a much less inflamed issue than it was.
So is he politically correct now, Charles? I mean, is he a politically correct king?
Well, I mean, I think that he rather reminds me of Biden, the sort of two woke grandpas. Yes, he, in a way, in terms of his class of people, very much so, actually. I mean, that's what's so ironic about Charles, is that he, because he seems like such an old fogey, and with that, the strangulated voice and the kind of the way he's like the only one in a coat and tie when everyone else is in, in a t-shirt. But actually, he's quite an unconventional thinker, and he always has been. I mean, his interfaith initiatives were very early, as we've said. The environmental stuff was very early. I mean, he believes in a tremendous amount in in non-orthodox medicine, and was always kind of herbal remedies, all this stuff about Charles. I mean, he's quite a sort of hippy dippy side to Charles that is kind of part of the interesting sort of paradoxes of his personality. So in his class terms, yes, he probably is, but at the same time, he's also kind of the squarest man you could possibly imagine. I mean, he's a funny combination, actually.
So casting ahead, say 20 years time, let's assume he stays in good health and he's decided to pass the throne on to William in 20 years. What state do you think will find the British monarchy in?
I think it's going to be much less global, the monarchy, because, what kept the monarchy global was the Commonwealth and the Queen's endless commitment. I mean, year upon year of those big royal tours, I mean, that is definitely going to get reduced and reduced. The royal tour, we saw the last one was a complete fiasco with when William and Kate went to Barbados, and they just were.
And they had the chain link fence.
The chain link fence, Kate in a huge white tea tray hat, standing at the back of a car that, the Queen had once ridden on with Mountbatten, and the two of them. It was just all wrong in terms of contemporary imagery in a much more diverse world. So I think that the royal tours are going to become much more about sort of brisk business visits, but that in turn is going to reduce their footprint. So I think you'll see in 20 years' time a much more reduced global footprint. I think they're going to be much more like the European monarchs. I mean, can anybody even call up the name or the face of the King of Sweden or Belgium, or I mean these other European countries? Their families are very much liked or well regarded, but they have very little they don't punch much above their weight at all, whereas the British monarchy is always punched wildly above its weight. That I think probably will change, and I wouldn't be surprised if by the time William gets in, I wonder whether there'll even be a coronation, because, England's the only country that does have a coronation. None of the European monarchies have coronations. We're the last ones left. And I can imagine William, who actually is absolutely not interested in any of that, I can imagine him saying, why? Why are we doing a coronation? And might not happen again. Maybe seeing the last coronation.
So I know you're... Right. Well, I was just going to say, I know you're covering the event for CBS on Saturday, so people really should tune in, because final question to you, this very well may be the last coronation that we ever get to see.
Yes, it may well be. I wouldn't be surprised if it is the last one. Absolutely, yes. So
well,
everyone should tune in.
I can't wait to hear your commentary on Saturday. I shall be glued to my television, sadly not having been invited.
5 a.m. 5 a.m.
Thank you. I know, it's very early. You would think that they might have timed it better with the American television market. That's what I would have done if I was planning it, but they didn't ask me.
No, they didn't ask, and the Yeoman of Network didn't do it.
Well, Tina, thank you very much for joining us. As ever, a complete authority on events, royal, and enormous fun to boot. And if people haven't read your book, Palace Papers, I hope they use this as an opportunity to pick it up.
Love talking to you, Joanna, always. Bye.
Bye.